I know how this story ends. I have known for a while now. So when I tell you about the woman I was before that phone call, the one standing in the kitchen in her socks, loyalty rewards number in hand, genuinely excited about a weekend away, I need you to understand that she was real. That version of me was completely, fully real. And I miss her in a way I cannot always put into words. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early March. The kids were still at school. I had a cup of coffee going cold on the counter next to my laptop, and I had spent the better part of an hour on travel blogs and TripAdvisor reviews trying to find somewhere perfect. Marcus had said, "You pick this time, surprise me." He had said it the way he sometimes said things, easy, generous, like he was handing me a gift. I took it as a gift. I took everything he gave me as a gift back then. We had been together for 9 years, married for 7 of them. We had 2 kids, Lena, who was 8, and Cole, who had just turned 6, and a yellow lab named Biscuit, who destroyed exactly 1 sofa cushion per year without fail. We lived in a neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where you know your neighbors' cars and their kids' names, and which houses put their trash out on the wrong day. It was a good life. It was the life I had chosen and kept choosing every single morning when I got up and made lunches and kissed him goodbye before he left for work. I was not a naive woman. I want to say that clearly. I had been through enough in my 30s to understand that marriages take work, that love is a decision as much as a feeling, that nothing good is ever just handed to you. I knew that. I had done the work I thought we both had. The hotel I found was called the Alderton House. It was a boutique in about 2 hours from Columbus in a small town in the Hocking Hills area. It had a 4.8-star rating, a wood-burning fireplace in every room, and this wraparound porch that looked out over the hills. The photos were gorgeous. Every review mentioned how quiet it was, how it felt like stepping away from everything. One woman wrote that she and her husband went every year for their anniversary and it never got old. I remember reading that and thinking, that is what I want for us. I pulled up the phone number. I had already checked their availability online. They had a room open for the weekend of our anniversary in April, but I wanted to call and ask a few questions. Whether breakfast was included, whether the fireplace needed a key or just a switch. Little things. I was always a little things kind of person. The woman who answered was friendly. She had that warm, unhurried voice that small inns always seem to hire for. I told her I was interested in booking a room for the second weekend of April, and I gave her Marcus's last name, Calloway, because I was going to put it under his name as a surprise. I had this small, silly plan to print out a little card and leave it on the kitchen counter for him. "Your bag is already packed. Let's go." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not long, maybe 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, something shifted in my chest in a way I did not understand yet. "Welcome back, Mr. Calloway," she said. "Will your guest be needing the same room as last time?" I did not say anything. I think I just stood there holding the phone against my ear with my hand gone completely still on the countertop. The coffee was still there. Biscuit was somewhere in the back of the house doing whatever dogs do when the house is quiet. The afternoon light was coming through the kitchen window the way it always did in March, that pale, watery kind of light that has not decided yet whether it wants to be winter or spring. "Ma'am," she said, "are you still there?" "I'm sorry," I said. My voice came out normal. "I don't know how. Could you say that again?" She was flustered by then. I could hear it. She apologized immediately, said she shouldn't have said that she had mixed up accounts, stumbling over herself in that way people do when they realize they've handed you something they can't take back. But we both knew. I could hear it in the silence between her words. She knew what she had done, and I knew what it meant. I thanked her. I told her I'd call back to confirm the booking. I hung up the phone, and I set it down on the counter very carefully, the way you put something down when you are afraid that if you're not careful you will drop it. I stood there for a long time. I looked at the TripAdvisor page still open on my laptop, the photos of the wraparound porch, the wood-burning fireplace, the hills going soft and gray in the distance. He had already been there. He had already been there with someone. I didn't cry. That surprised me later when I thought back on it. I didn't cry right away. I just stood in my kitchen with a cold coffee and the pale March light and this new piece of information, sitting in the center of my chest like something I'd swallowed wrong. I couldn't move it. I couldn't breathe around it. I could only stand there and begin, very slowly, to understand that the life I was standing inside of was not entirely the one I had believed it to be. The school pickup was in 40 minutes. I had 40 minutes before I needed to be normal again. I closed my laptop. I picked up Lena and Cole at 3:15 like I always did. I was parked in the second row of the pickup line in the same spot I took every Tuesday with the same NPR station playing low on the radio because I always forgot to change it. Cole came out first, backpack half unzipped, one shoe untied, telling me about a kid in his class who had brought a live caterpillar in a jar and the teacher had screamed. Lena came out 2 minutes later, quieter the way she always was after school, needing a few minutes before she was ready to talk. I listened. I laughed at the caterpillar story. I asked Lena about her spelling test. I do not know how I did that. I genuinely do not know where that version of me came from in those 40 minutes between the phone call and the pickup line. But she showed up. She buckled everyone in. She stopped at the Kroger on the way home for milk and the particular brand of applesauce Cole would actually eat. And she made dinner that night, chicken cutlets and frozen corn, and the kind of dinner that isn't special but gets eaten, while Marcus sat at the kitchen table going through his work email, and she didn't say a single word. Because here's the thing I haven't told you yet. I didn't know for certain that it was what I thought it was. That is the story I told myself that first evening. The hotel woman had been flustered. She said she mixed up accounts. Maybe she had. Maybe someone else named Calloway had stayed there. Maybe Marcus had gone there for a work retreat, some team building thing he mentioned once and I'd already forgotten. Maybe, and this was the one I kept returning to, the one I turned over the most carefully, maybe he had already been planning the trip himself and had called ahead without telling me, and it was supposed to be a surprise, and I had stumbled into the middle of something innocent. I wanted that explanation to be true so badly that I almost believed it. Almost. Marcus poured himself a glass of iced tea and asked me how my day was, and I said, "Fine, just busy," and he nodded and looked back at his phone phone, and that was the whole conversation. And I stood at the stove watching the oil shimmer in the pan, thinking about the way the woman on the phone had said your guest, not your wife, not Mrs. Calloway. Your guest. I didn't sleep well that night. Marcus fell asleep quickly the way he always did, that immediate, untroubled sleep that used to make me a little envious, and I lay there in the dark beside him listening to his breathing and trying to decide what kind of woman I was going to be about this. Whether I was going to ask him, whether I was going to look first. I looked first. I am not ashamed of that. I know some people have opinions about going through a spouse's phone, and I respect that those opinions exist, but I also know that when you have been handed a piece of information like that, when a stranger's voice on the phone has just quietly rearranged everything, you don't ask permission to understand your own life. You just try to survive the not knowing. He left his phone on the nightstand. He always had. He had never been secretive about it, never carried it into the bathroom, never angled the screen away from me. I had always taken that as a sign of nothing to hide. That night, for the first time, I wondered if it meant something else entirely, if it meant he was careful in some other way I had not thought to look for. His passcode was our anniversary date. It opened on the first try. I didn't find anything right away. That almost made it worse. His texts were ordinary work threads, a group chat with his college friends, a long exchange with his brother about their dad's upcoming birthday. His email was messy and boring. I scrolled back weeks and found nothing that made my stomach drop. But I wasn't done. I went to his photos, not the camera rolls, the albums. There was one labeled miscellaneous that I had never noticed before or maybe never thought to open. It had 62 photos in it. I tapped it with my thumb like I was opening a door I already knew I couldn't unopen. Most of them were receipts, screenshots of confirmation emails. I scrolled past them quickly and then I stopped. There was a photo of a room, a beautiful room with dark wood walls and a stone fireplace and a window that looked out over hills going soft in the early evening light, a bottle of wine on the table, 2 glasses, the kind of room that exists for exactly one reason, and it is not work, and it is not a team retreat, and it is not anything I had been willing to let myself believe. I can. Yo, that room. I had spent an hour looking at photos of that room on TripAdvisor that very afternoon. The Alderton house. I put his phone back on the nightstand. I did it slowly, carefully, the same way I had set down my phone in the kitchen earlier that day. I lay back down beside my husband in our bed, in our house, in the neighborhood where everyone knew our car, and I stared at the ceiling and I felt something shift inside me that I understood even then was permanent. Not the grief, not the anger. Those would come later, big and loud and impossible to manage. What shifted that night was something quieter than that. It was the ground itself. The thing I had been standing on without even knowing I was standing on it. The assumption that the life I was living was the life that was actually happening. The ceiling fan turned slowly above me. Marcus slept. I lay there and I thought, how longs? Not who, not why, not what am I going to do. Just how long had I been the only one in this marriage who was fully in it? The answer, I was beginning to understand, was going to be worse than one trip to a boutique inn in Hocking Hills. I could feel it the way you feel a storm before it arrives. Not the rain yet, just the pressure change, just the sky going a color it shouldn't be. Cole had a soccer game Saturday morning. I needed to wash his uniform before then. I got up and started a load of laundry at 2 in the morning. The thing about finding out your husband has been somewhere he shouldn't have been is that your brain does not stop at the thing you found. It goes back. It goes all the way back through every month and every ordinary Tuesday and every moment you explained away, and it starts asking questions you never thought to ask before. It is not a linear process. It is not clean. It is more like someone has handed you a different pair of glasses, and now you cannot stop looking at everything you thought you knew. I spent the next 4 days looking. Not frantically, not the way you see in movies where the woman tears the house apart and screams. I was quiet about it. I was methodical in a way that surprised me, in a way that I think was my mind's way of protecting me from the full weight of what I was doing. I went through the credit card statements online. We had a joint account and 2 individual ones, and I had never paid much attention to his individual card because that was just how we had always done it, the way a lot of couples divide things up without thinking about it too hard. I paid attention now. There were charges I did not recognize, not enormous ones, nothing so obvious it announced itself. Small things, a restaurant in a neighborhood of Columbus we never went to together, a florist charge in November which was not my birthday, not our anniversary, not any holiday that calls for flowers, 2 charges from a hotel in Cincinnati from a weekend in September when he had told me he was at a conference for work. I had packed him a bag. I had made sure he had his phone charger and the good travel shampoo, and I had kissed him goodbye at the door. I sat with those credit card statements for a long time. I printed them out, which felt strange and serious, like I was building a case, and I sat at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning after the kids had gone to school and I just read them, line by line, month by month, going back a year then further. It had been going on for at least 14 months. 14 months. Lena had been in 2nd grade when it started. Cole had still been in kindergarten. I had been in the middle of a home renovation project that had stressed me out for most of the fall, and Marcus had been, I remembered this clearly now, in that horrible new light, so patient with me during that time, so gentle. He had told me not to worry about it, that it would all work out, that I needed to stop stressing. He had been almost unusually kind. I understood now what that kindness had been covering. I called my sister Dana on Friday morning. I told her I needed her to come over. I didn't tell her why. She heard something in my voice and she didn't ask. She just said, I'll be there by 10, and she was. I showed her everything, the printed statements, the photo of the hotel room on his phone, which I had taken a screenshot of from my own phone because I needed to have it somewhere he couldn't delete. Dana sat at my kitchen table and went through it all and didn't say anything for a long time. How are you this calm? She asked. I'm not, I said. I just haven't started yet. She understood what I meant. I had made a decision somewhere in those 4 sleepless nights. I was going to know everything before I said a word to him. I was not going to confront him with a piece of the picture. I was not going to give him the chance to minimize it, to explain it into something smaller than it was, to look me in the eye and say it was just once, it didn't mean anything, and have me standing there why. Without enough ground under my feet to argue. I had seen women go through that. I had watched them accept the partial truth because they didn't have the whole one yet. I was not going to be that woman. Dana asked me if I knew who it was. I told her I had an idea. There was a woman named Kristen who worked in Marcus's office. I had met her twice, once at a company holiday party 2 years ago, once at a cookout at his coworker Jeff's house last summer. She was pretty in an uncomplicated way, easy to talk to, the kind of woman who laughs at everything slightly before it's finished being funny. I had not felt threatened by her. I had not felt anything in particular about her. She had just been a person at a party. I went back to the Instagram account I had looked at once and forgotten about. Her profile was mostly public. I scrolled back carefully, looking for nothing specific, just looking. October, a photo of a fall hike, rolling hills, orange trees, a wooden porch railing in the corner of the frame. I knew that porch railings. I had spent an hour looking at photos of that porch railing. I put my phone face down on the table and I sat very still for a moment. Dana put her hand over mine. Neither of us said anything. There was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already saying better. That night Marcus came home from work and said he was thinking we should try that new barbecue place on Henderson for dinner Saturday, just the two of us. Maybe get Dana to watch the kids. He was smiling when he said it. Easy, generous, like he was handing me a gift. I looked at his face, that familiar face I had been looking at for 9 years. I looked at it the way you look at something when you are memorizing it, when you understand that the version of it you are seeing right now is about to change, and you will never get this particular moment back. Sure, I said, that sounds nice. He kissed me on the cheek and went to say hello to the kids, and I stood in the kitchen and I felt the whole shape of it settle into me completely. Not a suspicion anymore, not a fear, a fact, hard and permanent and mine to decide what to do with. I had already called an attorney that afternoon, just to understand my options, just to know what the ground looked like before I stepped onto it. She had been calm and practical and kind, and at the end of the call she said, "Take your time, you don't have to decide anything today." I had thanked her and hung up and sat in my car in the Walgreens parking lot for 20 minutes. Then I drove home and made dinner and helped Cole with his reading worksheet and watched Marcus laugh at something on television, and I held everything I knew inside my chest like something breakable that I was not going to drop. Not yet. Not until I was ready, I told him on a Sunday. I chose Sunday deliberately. The kids were at my mother's for the weekend. She had taken them for what she thought was just a nice grandmother visit because I had asked her without explaining why, and she had said yes the way my mother always says yes when she hears something in my voice that tells her not to ask questions yet. The house was quiet in that specific way it only gets when Lena and Cole are both gone. That particular stillness that used to feel like a treat, and that morning felt like something I needed in order to get through what was coming. Marcus was in the backyard with his coffee when I brought everything out. The printed statements, the screenshot of the hotel room photo, a single piece of paper where I had written down the dates, 14 months of them next to the corresponding charges, the corresponding lies. I had not planned to make a document like that. It had happened almost without my deciding it, the way some things do when your mind is trying to protect you by giving you something concrete to hold. I set it on the patio table in front of him and I sat down across from him and I said, "I need you to look at this." He looked at it. I watched his face. I had been with this man for 9 years and I knew every version of his face, and what moved across it in those first few seconds was not the face of a man who had a good explanation. It was the face of a man who understood immediately that the door he had kept closed for 14 months had just come open all the way. He said her name before I did. That told me everything I had not quite been able to confirm. I am not going to walk you through all of what he said after that, partly because it was not different enough from what you might expect to be worth the telling, and partly because I have spent a long time trying to put it behind me and I have earned that. There were explanations that didn't hold. There was the word mistake used in a way that felt like an insult to the length of it. There were tears, his, that I did not know what to do with. There was a moment when he reached across the table toward my hand, and I moved it away without thinking, the way you pull ba. CK from something hot. What I will tell you is this, I was calmer than I expected to be. Not cold, I was not cold. I cried too eventually, but not until later, not in front of him. In that moment, sitting across from him on our patio with a Sunday morning quiet around us and Biscuit pushing his nose against the sliding glass door from inside, I was steady in a way I had not known I was capable of being. I said what I needed to say. I asked the questions I needed answered. I listened to the answers and I let myself understand them fully, which is a harder thing to do than it sounds. And then I told him I wanted him to stay with his brother while I figured out the next steps. He asked me if there was any chance. Those were his exact words, "Is there any chance?" I thought about the woman on the phone at the Alderton house. "Welcome back, Mr. Calloway. Will your guest be needing the same room as last time?" I thought about the florist charge in November, the Cincinnati hotel, 14 months of ordinary Tuesdays and school pickups and chicken cutlets for dinner while I was living inside one life and he was living inside two. I told him I didn't know. That was the honest answer. I was not going to perform certainty I didn't have. He left that afternoon with 2 bags. I stood at the front door and watched his car back out of the driveway, and I held onto the door frame, not because I was going to fall, but because I needed to feel something solid under my hand. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. I will not pretend otherwise. There were mornings I got the kids to school and came home and sat on the kitchen floor and cried in a way I had not cried since I was very young, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deeper than sadness, from some place in you that only opens when something fundamental has been taken. There were nights Lena climbed into bed with me without asking why and just put her small arm around me and I held onto her and thought, she is going to be okay. I am going to make sure of that. That is the one thing I know how to do right now. I told the kids their dad was staying at Uncle Ryan's for a while because of some grown-up stuff we were working through. Cole accepted this immediately and asked if Biscuit could sleep asleep in his room. Lena looked at me for a long moment with those careful eyes of hers and said, "Are you okay, Mom?" And I said, "I'm getting there, baby." And she nodded like that was enough, like she trusted me to tell her the truth about that much at least. Dana came over more. My mother came over more. I let them. I had spent a long time being the kind of woman who insists she is fine, and I was done with that particular performance. I started seeing a therapist in May, a woman named Carol who had an office above a yoga studio and a way of asking questions that made you feel like you had thought of the answers yourself. She helped me understand that what I was grieving was not just Marcus, not just the marriage, but the version of my life I had believed in completely and without question. That grief was real, and it deserved to be treated as real. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. I kept the house. Marcus sees the kids every other weekend and every Wednesday evening, and he is a decent father even now, and I have decided for Lena and Cole, and also for myself, that I am not going to spend whatever is left of my life being angry at him. Not because what he did was acceptable. It was not, but because anger that size, carried that long, belongs to him, and I am done carrying things that belong to him. I still drive past the Kroger where I stopped for milk and applesauce on the day everything changed. I still drink coffee at the same kitchen table. I still hear biscuits nails on the hardwood in the morning and feel, for just a second, like everything is ordinary. Those moments used to hurt. Now they just feel like proof that ordinary life continued, that I continued. There is a woman I know now, through therapy, through time, through the specific education of surviving something you did not think you would survive, who is quieter than the woman I was before and also somehow less afraid. She does not need the ground to stay still in order to keep standing. She has learned the hard way that she can find her footing even when everything shifts. Last April, on what would have been our 10th anniversary, I took the kids to Hocking Hills, not the Alderton house. A different place entirely, a little cabin Dana found for us with a fire pit out back and a view of the trees just starting to come in green. We roasted hot dogs and Cole dropped his in the fire and cried for approximately 90 seconds before deciding he wasn't that hungry anyway. Lena found a salamander under a rock and carried it around for an hour. I sat in a folding chair in the early evening light and watched my children and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exact. TLY, something quieter than that, something that belonged entirely to me. I did not book that trip to impress anyone. I did not plan it to prove anything or to replace something or to reclaim a place that had been taken from me. I booked it because my kids had never seen those hills and I wanted to show them something beautiful. That felt like enough. That felt like exactly enough.